disruptive developments, calling for radical innovations. Digitization has sparked dynamic shifts that are changing our everyday lives. Do you want to understand how and why? Let's get to it.
Journalist or IT specialist? Do we need to be both? Sustaining new businesses online is not an easy task. Using data to make journalism successful.
And I am now joined by a panel of experts that will bring us a very diverse perspective mixture about this issue. I'm going to start welcoming all of you. Imme Baumüller, she is the Director of Data Technology and Business Intelligence at the Handelsblatt Group. For those of you who may not know it, Handelsblatt is Germany's most important financial newspaper, but of course only one of several products of the company. Welcome to you, Imme. Camila Marques is joining us from Brazil. She is responsible for audience strategies and digital editorial projects at Grupo Folha. Folha de São Paulo is one of Brazil's most renowned newspapers, and of course also just one of several products that the company, the group, has today. And last but not least, I'm also welcoming Nick Newman. He is a senior research associate at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism based in Oxford. Thank you very much to all three of you. I'm very glad that you're here with us to bring and shed light on a topic that, again, is very controversial. And when we talk about this controversy, I'd like to start with a hard question, but of course it's a pressing one when we take a look at the title of this panel, using data to make journalism successful. And I'd like to start with you, Imme. Please tell us, what is success? How do you define it at Handelsblatt?
Okay, that's a very tough question at the beginning. But for us, success means that we are able to generate subscriptions for our products and our offering, and that we are able to keep our users for as long as possible, so that we have products that satisfy their needs and that make them convinced that our product are the right ones for them to go through their business life and personal life.
And I would like to compare that to the perspective of another publisher, that would be Folha de São Paulo. Camila, how would you answer to that very difficult, I know, question, but I'd like to start with the tough one here. How do you define success at Folha de São Paulo for your products?
For success, our business model is based on subscriptions. So we have to make all the efforts to engagement, and so convince the reader to decide to pay for the content. But before this, I think I define success when I touch journalists not to be feared about data. I used to say that I used to be in the 10 years more a psychologist than a journalist or a data specialist, because once that journalist realized that data can help them really a lot. So this is success. Touching journalists not to be feared about data.
All right. And I think I will also ask the same question to you, Nick, because you work with many different media organizations. I have the impression that the definition of success in the digital age definitely has changed. What's your impression? How would you answer that question?
Absolutely. Yeah. We started off with, advertising-driven models, and so the metrics that people used were page views, unique users, because the clicks were the things that drove the ad dollars, and that's how the ads were sold. But of course, now we're seeing many media organizations, as Camila says, shifting towards subscription or donation models, and that means that the metrics that are being used are increasingly about engagement. So it might be an engagement score. For example, the Financial Times famously used an engagement score for each user, which combines sort of how recently they came to the site, how frequently, how much content that they consume. And what they're trying to do is to increase the levels of engagement, particularly for people who might be at risk of not resubscribing. So I think the sort of data and the metrics that people have used has changed a lot, and the sophistication has also changed a lot. In newsrooms. So, what you're really trying to do is to come up with metrics that journalists can understand on the one hand, but also, marketeers can use on the other hand to drive people to the product.
Okay, so all three of you have mentioned the keyword engagement. Maybe there's someone in our audience who does not necessarily know or understand what exactly that means. Imme, would you dare to define that for us? How do you define engagement?
Oh. Okay, so there might be some similarities for all of us. So we are at Handelsblatt Media Group, we define engagement as a combination of how often you visit the website, how long you stay on the website, how much content you consume on the website, and some other metrics depending on the channel you are looking at. It's kind of trying to measure the intensity of usage and frequency of usage user have.
So we're definitely far ahead of what used to be a simple click or the amount of likes or the amount of comments that many people still use, in my impression, as a standard. Nick, I would like to come back to you just to ask a general question also, because you work with many media organizations. How far are we in this field in newsrooms internationally? I would say it's of course, a very general question, but just to
subscribing. So I think the sort of data and the metrics that people have used has changed a lot, and the sophistication has also changed a lot in newsrooms. So what you're really trying to do is to come up with metrics that journalists can understand on the one hand, but also marketeers can use on the other hand to drive people to the product.
Okay, so all three of you have mentioned the keyword engagement. Maybe there's someone in our audience who does not necessarily know or understand what exactly that means. Imme, would you dare to define that for us? How do you define engagement?
Oh. Okay, so there might be some similarities for all of us. So we are at Handelsblatt Media Group, we define engagement as a combination of how often you visit the website, how long you stay on the website, how much content you consume on the website, and some other metrics depending on the channel you are looking at. It's kind of trying to measure the intensity of usage and frequency of usage user have.
So we're definitely far ahead of what used to be a simple click or the amount of likes or the amount of comments that many people still use, in my impression, as a standard. Nick, I would like to come back to you just to ask a general question also, because you work with many media organizations. How far are we in this field in newsrooms internationally? I would say it's of course, a very general question, but just to know where we stand right now. Are media organizations using data to a certain extent that is enough in your perspective, or are we just at the beginning of a trend?
I think it depends on the organization. It's quite patchy. I was involved in the start of the BBC News site in 1997, and it used to take a week to get back any information about how your story was done, for example. And now most newsrooms have real-time information about what's trending, how many subscribers the story's pulling in. We have all kinds of generic tools in newsrooms like, Chartbeat, or tools that measure what's going on in social media. So in some sense, we have a lot of data in newsrooms coming out of our ears. And the challenge is really to know how to use that data, how it sort of fits the business models or the wider aims. And that's why on top of that, the most successful publishers have been employing audience engagement teams, audience editors, and their job is really to drive deeper, actionable insights, but also to work with the editors to make sense of that data. And in a paper we wrote a few years ago, we talked about the tools as almost being the first step, but then beyond that, you need to have an organizational structure. That means you've got expertise to know how to use that data and draw insights out of it. And then thirdly, you need a newsroom culture where people respect data and actually take it seriously. And so, again, depending on where you are, what kind of company you are, people are at different stages of that progress.
And that's exactly a very important aspect, a very important point that I would like to talk to you with. Camila, you already told us that you want journalists not to be afraid of data. Why do you think it is in the first place that you even have to mention that when talking about this issue? I don't know if Camila can hear me. I am afraid she froze. So maybe I'm going to toss that then to Imme at Handelsblatt. if I take a look at your title, even, you're Director of Data Technology and Business Intelligence. That's a role that we would probably not have heard of a few years ago. So what's your impression about working with journalists in their day-by-day job and the relation that they have to data? Are you sort of the bad guys in your department?
Probably, yes, a little bit the bad guys, at least at the beginning. So with all this data issues coming up and the way to change working in a publishing company, it's a kind of digital transformation that's taking place. And data is one part of that. And everybody in the company has to accept that maybe the work he or she does is measured, and that's a kind of really new situation for journalists, because in the old area where you only had print issues, you knew how many issues you would sell, but you wouldn't be able to tell how many people would read your specific article. Nobody could tell. And now the journalists have to get used to the situation that we can measure the performance of each and every article they publish, and that's of course a little bit uncomfortable. And the line with that is the problem, of course, that you're an independent journalist, and this is what you've been educated to be, and it is part of your self-esteem and everything that makes you a journalist, an independent journalist. So, of course, there were many issues we had, and we still have, with finding a great way not to over-evaluate data, but still use data to improve the products and content you offer. So it's really a little dance we have to do, and we're still on the way.
Yeah. Camila, to get back to you, you're back with us. I'm very glad to see you again. We were talking about just the fear that you mentioned at the beginning that many journalists have when talking about data and how their work is being analyzed and how it can be measured. I was just asking Imme, and I would also like to ask you, how do you deal with that fear exactly? Because I know that your main product, Folha de São Paulo, is a newspaper with a lot of tradition in Brazil, and I can imagine, like with any other big organization that has been there for years, many structures have to be probably breaking through.
Yes, so I think the key, as Nick said, I think the key is create really clear dashboards, and the journalists have to understand that the actions that they did and the titles and the hyperlinks and the embed that they decided to create inside a piece of news, it's really, really important. The engagement of the reader realized is directly connected with the journalist decisions. Once the journalists realized that the power is in their hands, they passed the fear, and it's a little bit seduced, because any action and choose of links can change the relationship of the reader with the content. So the engagement can increase 50%, the recirculation, the number of readers that are reading something in Folha de São Paulo and go to another link can increase a lot. When we decided to share the number of the business with the newsroom, we realized that the journalists become engaged with our data strategy. So yes, it's hard. As a mom and a dad, we have to repeat the same thing many times. But when they realized that, oh my God, the business models depend on me. Yes, we are the most important newspaper in Brazil. The content is the king. The great content is the king. But every step, every business step are connected with what journalists can do. And for us, it was a change of mindset when we opened the business numbers to the newsroom. When they used to say that we are in the same canoe, but it's not enough to be in the same canoe. We have to working together. And for us at Folha de São Paulo, putting newsroom and subscription department working together was really, really important. And explain what means engagement and time spent and SEO You have to repeat every day, and but it's great.
That's great, but it's also tough work. And Nick, I would like to ask you, because you, of course, do a lot of research on the subject. How do you integrate it best to a newsroom or to a culture of a newsroom? If data is so complicated, if there are so many different metrics, so many different platforms to measure it, is there a recipe, or how would you advise someone who's maybe working in a newsroom where they are confused by just the amount of information that is out there? Where do you start?
Right. Well, I mean, I think the first thing is to recognize that you have different kinds of metrics that are important to different parts of the business, but they're all overlapping. So, you can start with the newsroom, where Camila's just sort of been describing the processes you have to go through, which is partly around educating people about the value of data and which metrics to look at, and for what purpose. But then on top of that, so that's where the audience engagement team, I think, is crucial. That you do have specialists quite often. Some will come from an editorial background, some may come from a marketing background, and they're within the newsroom. They're really helping to drive insights and as well as supporting the journalists. And then on top of that, you also have other people who need to use data, such as sort of marketeers who are thinking about how do you bring in new subscribers and how to take them on a journey for the first 90 days, for example, which is a sort of typical thing that you need to do to engage users when they first come in. And then product teams who maybe need to work on engagement as well, but through product features. And so this is a really, really complicated space because you need sort of metrics that hold those things together, but different parts of the organization may be looking at different kinds of metrics.
But doesn't that mean, Nick, that a journalist that is working in a newsroom anywhere basically depends on someone who is not necessarily interested in journalistic values or in the journalistic work, but rather in numbers and data to know and lead the way of what to do and how?
I don't particularly think so. I think a lot of that comes down to have a clear metrics framework. So if you have that and you're clear about what you're trying to do and what any journalist needs to focus on at a particular time, and that's where the tools are really good, because particularly ones that media companies have developed themselves, because they can really sort of signal and highlight the ones that are important to that particular organization. So, for example, I talked earlier about clicks as being important, so you can easily sort of get dashboards of clicks, but increasingly, subscription publications will have, they might be measuring things like article reads, which is not just whether you click, but whether you engage with it. And it's a kind of composite metric, but it's simple enough for journalists to be able to focus on. So I think it's partly, a key part of this is what is the metric in the first place and how do you define that metric?
Now, Imme, back to you at Handelsblatt specifically. Can you give us examples of something that has worked out as to the way to adapt content specifically to information that you have received through the data that you analyze?
Well, to be honest, we started really with quick wins. So we just did simple things, just like looking at the time people would visit our website and then maybe show everybody with very clear charts. Okay, everybody's coming in the morning between 6 and 9 o'clock, and that's when they are there. And if you don't publish many new articles at that time, you might lose these readers because they want to read very new articles. And these would be like really the small steps, or with regards to the onboarding journey Nick just mentioned, we tried to figure out if people would have different reading behaviors depending on if they would stay with the subscription after a trial or not. And then we realized, okay, we really have to activate the people in the first 3 days to keep them with our products, and that would bring success. That's not really related to the content, but to the way we deliver the content and the way we try to communicate and interact with the users. With regards to content, we try to figure out how to write different content, or how to construct it in terms of how long the article needs to be, how many pictures, how interactive, depending on different devices you would use. So you would have the same article with the same content, but maybe with different features and add-ons, etc., depending if it's in the app or on the website. And these are things we're just starting to work with, but step by step we get there.
Step by step, we'll get there. And that's something that also Camila mentioned. You have to be very resilient and insist on the concepts, because probably journalists at the beginning will not necessarily know or understand all those metrics. Camila, if you take a look at Folha de São Paulo, another very important topic that almost always is part of the discussion when we're talking about this is the famous paywall and the subscription models that news outlets have to rely on in part these days. How is that discussion held at Folha specifically? And how has data also helped you know, for example, what has to be paid for and what has not to be paid for?
Yes, we was the first newspaper to launch Paywall, and 8 years ago. Nowadays, we have a dynamic paywall. What we have to look is the purpose of the king. We have hard paywall in some part of the websites. We have a free paywall in other parts of websites. And we have to analyze everything every month. We realized that in Brazil, the Brazilian ones are they are paying for consumer news, but not the youngest are paying for reading for news. We are in a period that you are launching campaigns to explain how valuable journalism is, how expensive doing a great journalism is. We are trying to launch seminars and events to engage and to teach the youngest and the young readers the importance of our job. But paywall, definitely it's a key for our business model. Without the paywall, the amount of money that's coming from our publicity, it's not enough. So again, the content is the king to convert subscribers. 90% of our subscribers came from paywall, so came from the great content and the relationship with the website. As Nick and my colleague said, we have to analyze how many times the reader come back in a month, how kind of articles they are reading in any visit, and offer a related content of their interests. But I think the paywall is a really important business model for news website nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Now, Nick, listening to all of this, you can really understand the anxiety that these insights might cause to some journalists working in a newsroom, because, of course, they hear, we do need the paywall. It's extremely important, and that means we need successful products. You need to write good content in order for us to survive, and therefore for you to keep your job on the long run. I would like to talk to you, because it's also important, even though it's not the key topic of the panel, but how does this impact the culture of a newsroom? Before, you had the impression, as a newspaper, for example, you were successful together and you failed together. You saw that the newspaper simply was sold or was not sold. Today, you can even know which journalists in a specific newsroom are the most successful ones. There are rankings that's also a possibility to sort through authors. What does this do with the way we all work together in an environment that is extremely dependent on teamwork?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that most journalists, when I was a journalist, I really wanted to know which bits of my story worked and which didn't, and whether the stories were working. So you crave feedback. So in one sense, digital is fantastic, and I think most journalists would agree with that. I think there are some sort of ethical issues about how you implement this within newsrooms, and certainly many organizations have had rankings, and some have even used those rankings to reward particular journalists compared with other journalists. And that is not always, you may have star journalists who bring in subscriptions, for example, but people working on particular kinds of stories that are important, but not necessarily ones that bring in subscriptions, may suffer as a result. So, if you're working on, for example, certain types of foreign news, which are really important for the brand in a long-term sense, you may not get huge clicks on it. whereas entertainment journalists may get more clicks. Is that what you really want? So you have to think through those ethical issues, and journalists are concerned about those things. But I think the best organizations really integrate it into the culture of the newsrooms. So it's about respecting the audience. It's about recognizing that you're in a battle for attention now, and that it's really important to be able to serve up content that is relevant at the right time in the right place.
Mm-hmm. Imme, we were talking about whether you were the bad guys or not the bad guys in the organization, but I would like to ask you, do you think that media organizations are doing enough to train the journalists and to confront them with this apparently impossible to avoid reality that is coming up?
No, I think that we all could do more with that regard, but of course there's a normal job that has to be done, and the paper has to be published, and everything is already changing and transforming. So yeah, there should be more effort and more maybe workshops, data dictionaries, more cross-divisional working. So we try to do that, but I think it's the media branch has much lacking behind. So many other industries can't keep up with that. That's a problem. And of course, with regards to data, what you have to have in mind that before working with data, you need to have a good data structure, and you need to have data sources you can trust. And these have to be established. And this is quite a challenge nobody really considers, because before working with data, you need to collect them in a good manner. And that takes a lot of time. And then you lag again behind some. But I wanted to change a little bit what Camila said, because I think, live in a little bubble, because we always say that it's all about the content and content is king. But I've talked to many users, and my impression is much more that it's not only the content, but the technology we deliver. So you need to have a really, really good user experience, and you have to have a really, really great app with great visuals and everything. If you don't supply that, the content can be really good, but you won't win.
Camila, would you like to jump in on that?
Yes. Yeah, I would like that. It's because of this, content is the king. We realize you have to take care about new users and new readers, and you have to really take care about our subscribers. And as Nick said, it's not amount of click that that make a subscriber decided to stay with us. It's the content, and it's special content. But it doesn't matter if you have the best story inside your computer. You have to publish. You have to help journalists to have a good CMS. You have the users have a good experience. And how do you balance the content and the IT costs and a great app? I used to say in the middle of newsroom, journalists and IT team. And when it's not the content, but the bad experience of my website, for example, that's causing frictionless. But if I have to choose one thing, I would decide to have great content. For us, is the great content that makes subscribers stay with us. Once it's convinced someone to subscribers, and another one, I think, tougher. It's convinced the subscribers stay with us. Avoid churn, I think, is the black space in journalist data. We have to avoid churn in spite of everything. And I completely agree with Imme. We have a good experience, but I still remain in great content.
That's good to hear for sure. But as hearing you two, I mean, you come from rather big organizations. Of course, you have a good management. You have the possibility to invest in these technologies also in order to provide this big user experience. For example, Nick, I would like to turn to you, just putting myself in the shoes of someone who might not be in a big organization, someone who maybe does not have that support of workshops, of a management that is aware of the importance of these possibilities that we have nowadays. What would you advise to someone who is now looking at this and is saying, okay, what about me? What can I do? Where would you advise them to start engaging? Is there maybe a book that you can recommend, or should they consult a specific website? How would you say what's a good first step if this is new for someone?
I mean, I think if you're not part of a big brand, then the big issue digitally is how do you get attention? How do you get the great content or email newsletter or whatever you're producing or podcast to be found? It's all about, getting close to data, having an audience-first, audience-centric view is absolutely critical. And I mean, the amazing thing is that actually, technology has just got so much easier. There are free tools out there like Google Analytics or, whatever email system you're using will come with great analytics. The key thing in many ways, I think, is not the technology. It's more about being really clear about what you're trying to do, and then identifying the metrics that you're going to use as a proxy for showing whether you're successful over time. And then, conducting a whole load of experiments to try and improve and get closer to what it is the audience wants.
We have not much time left, but I would like to end up with a last idea from Imme and Camila. Imme, what would your key core message briefly be for journalists from your perspective and from your position?
Take the chance and try to engage with data and try to use them as best as possible to improve what you do in a manner you feel comfortable with.
And Camila?
I used to say for big and small organization, data definitely can help you to engage with your reader. When you realize it, that looking at data can help you to see what the reader really wants and desire, and one change of word can do reader stay with you. So pay attention. I'm absolutely sure that data can help you to make a better journalist.
All right, those are very nice last words for today's panel. I think we all have to do some homework for sure. We have to engage. I think it has been very clear that the only way to make data a helpful tool for journalism is to simply understand it better and not be afraid of it. And of course, also approach the people in your organization, if you have them, who are knowledgeable of the subject and can actually give you insights that will help you reach the users that you want with better content. So I would like to thank all three of you for the very diverse perspectives that we heard today. I hope you have lots of success, to remind ourselves of the title of this panel, and I hope to see you soon, maybe even in person, in coming global media forums. Thank you very much, Imme, Nick, and Camila, for being with us today. That's it for this panel, Using Data to Make Journalism Successful. I'm Javier Arguedas. I'm very glad to have been with you, and I'm going to toss back to Liz now, because of course there is a lot more coming up at the Global Media Forum.